The world has shrunk.
We are in a period of remarkable tension.
Climate change and migration.
Emerging technologies.
Artificial intelligence.
Economic opportunities. Global health.
What is happening in Gaza.
Ukraine and Russia.
A situation in Sudan.
It's a messy world.
Mr. President, welcome to Chicago.
Chicago is a convergence of people and ideas and cultures from all over the world.
We are hoping that by listening to this conversation, we'll then move into real advocacy and action.
Fight is about everyday work, about your everyday contribution. Even small steps matter.
We need to do something now.
This is about democracy.
Inclusion, real inclusion.
Listening to one another.
What do you see as the path forward?
Go outside, please.
Good evening. Oh, thank you all for being here. This is great. 6:15 on a Tuesday night. We have a full house. This is great. So welcome. And thank you for joining us for today's discussion. My name is Ambassador Ertharin Cousin, and I am the CEO and Managing Director of Food Systems for the Future. I also have the privilege of serving as a distinguished fellow here at the Council. As you all know, the Council aims to foster a deeper understanding of global affairs. And we're honored tonight to have Ambassador Darci Vetter and Devry Vorwerk with us for this discussion on tariffs, trade policy, and the food system. Particularly when we talk about the food system, and I won't do a lecture here on food system, but we're talking about everything from the farm to the consumer. So, and when we talk about tariffs, we're truly talking about everything from the farm to the consumer. So much talk about tariffs and automobiles is what the press has been covering. But there's been surprisingly little discussion on tariffs and agriculture and food. And so we're going to correct that situation with tonight's conversation. And I'm delighted that Darci and that Ambassador Darci Vetter and Devry Boughner.
Just call me Devry. It's a tough
Vorwerk.
name.
I do it. We've been friends for 15 years and I still stumble. But let me tell you why I'm so excited to have my two friends here with us tonight. Ambassador Darci Vetter is an expert in international trade and agricultural policy. Darci served as the chief agricultural negotiator for the International Trade Advisor. And before that, she served as the advisor for the U.S. Senate Committee on Finance. Prior to working in the Senate, she led key roles at the U.S. Trade Representative's Office and in the State Department. In 2017, she became the diplomat in residence at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln, where she helped launch the Clayton K. Uter Institute of International Trade and Finance. Darci now serves as an advisor for numerous private sector clients on trade and agriculture-related issues. Devry, just call her Devry, is the founder and CEO of Devry BV Sustainable Strategies, an advisory firm focused on sustainable business solutions. Devry is also an expert in international trade, corporate affairs, and sustainability. Before starting her own firm, she served as the Chief Corporate Affairs Officer at Grubhub and as Chief Communications Officer and Global Head of Corporate Affairs at Cargill. And before going into the corporate sector, Devry held roles at Aiken Gump, the U.S. International Trade Commission, the Office of the U.S. Trade Representative, and the World Bank Group. When I was asked to come and prepare a conversation about trade, tariffs, and agriculture. And I said, I'm not the expert here, but I have friends who are. And as you can hear from their bios, these are the right leaders to support tonight's conversation. So we will begin today's program with a discussion, after which we will have a Q&A with this audience, as well as with those who are watching us on the live stream. And so please hold your questions until the Q&A portion of the program, when you'll be asked to ask your questions directly. And I ask you, I'm hoping we will share a robust dialogue tonight, not only amongst us here on the stage, but with you in the audience. And so when we get to that question and answer section, let's make it a question and not just an opportunity for a presentation. And that way we can ensure that more of those in the audience have an opportunity to participate. So I want to thank you for being here with us tonight. And for those who are joining us virtually, please remember that you can join in the conversation as well online at ccga.live. I'll repeat that, and I'm sure they'll put it up here at some point, ccga.live. But first, a few housekeeping details. Today's program is on the record, and any views expressed by our speakers are their own, even if it's me, and they do not reflect any Chicago Council official or institutional positions. The last point that I'll make before we jump into this discussion is please, please, please remember to silence your phones. Thank you. All right, my friends. With that, let's start with the first question. Since coming into office, President Trump has proposed an overhaul of global trade, referring to tomorrow, April 2nd, as Liberation Day. As we begin our discussion, can you help us? We'll start with you, Ambassador. Can you help us understand, when it comes to trade, tariffs, and agriculture, what the Trump administration is planning for Liberation Day?
Well, I think if you look at the overall trade policy that has been outlined or focused on by this administration, there's not a lot planned for agriculture. And agriculture is perhaps an afterthought or collateral damage in this America First trade policy. Most of the language around trade is about unfair trade practices and concerns about industries that are sensitive to imports. There is very little discussion about those industries that are in fact dependent on exports. And because of that, I think that puts agriculture in a particularly tight spot. What you have seen are some statements from Secretary Brooke Rollins and others to say, if ag is hurt, we'll try to find a way to make them whole. But there's not a lot of offense when it comes to the food and agriculture sector, unfortunately.
So build on that for us, Devry. When you talk about there's little thought or little conversation regarding farmers and ranchers and the impact of tariffs. What is the impact of tariffs on farmers and ranchers, potentially? As well as, and I must ask you to also speak about business.
Yeah, so first of all, I want to let you all know that I'm so excited to be here with Ambassador. Darci and I started way back, like when we were in kindergarten at the U.S. Trade Representative's office. And you were in the environmental shop and I was in what they called the ag shop. And so we've kind of come up through the last 25, 30 years where we've worked really hard as government, and then I went into private sector to integrate our food system in a way that worked for not only the U.S. food and ag community, but globally. And it's been a huge success story. And why I say that is because of the arduous negotiations that have gone on over many, many years to to address what do we want to bring in and what do we want to ship out, and how do we advance our comparative advantage because of that. Because we've worked very hard, we've pulled millions upon millions of people out of poverty around the world. So I just wanted to kind of lay that out, first and foremost. And to add to what Darci is saying is when we say there's not a plan for ag, and you're asking farmers and ranchers, it's not a homogenous group. Okay, we are one of the most, if not the most diversified food and ag system in the world. And food and agriculture has never been, and food and ag trade has never been a Republican or Democrat issue. It's always been an import or export issue. So if you wanted to see where we had some of the lasting protections, you'd have to go look and see, is it citrus? Is it sugar? Is it dairy? Is it, there's a subset of commodities that are gonna probably be okay because protection actually protects them. But for the most part, we're a powerhouse exporter. And it's going to impact every industry differently. We can kind of start to go through it, but what you hear is, we'll just subsidize the farmers. We've got a $10 billion bucket of money. Well, that's not going to go very far. It's not going to go very far. And so it's which farmers are they going to look at? Well, they talk a lot in the press about U.S. soy. U.S. soy is going to be hit first and foremost. It's been the greatest success story on exports to China. We never thought commercially we would go over 50 million metric tons. We're going over 100 million metric tons of exports of soybeans a year to China now. And they're going to be the hardest hit. So you're going to hear a lot from the soy industry. So maybe the $10 billion goes to the traditional row crops of soy, corn, wheat, etc. But the horticultural producers out in the state of California or the state of Florida, we'll see, right? They're not gonna get those subsidies. They're gonna have to fight it out.
And so, Darci, let me come right back to you on that, because I know you work with some of those horticulture businesses out in California. And what are you hearing from them about their concerns regarding the tariffs and the potential impact?
So, backing up just a little bit, just to make sure to break this down for folks who may not think about the ag trade very often, is we're talking about tariffs and the tariffs that the United States is going to impose. And that's going to make prices for farmers go up, their cost of production. So we already have tariffs on steel and aluminum. Mm-hmm. That is important for, irrigation equipment, for the cans and the jar, the bottles that we put agricultural products in that will make them more expensive when we then try to sell those goods. Fertilizer costs going up if we put tariffs on Canada in particular. So the tariffs that we're putting on imports are raising costs for farmers. But because agriculture is so dependent on exports, so 20% or about 1 in every 3 acres that we grow in the United States is exported, that makes us the target for the retaliatory tariffs that other countries then put on us because of those actions. And so as Devry was saying, those tariffs on soybeans from China, just that one front trade war last time in 2018 when we went toe-to-toe with China, USDA spent about $23 to $26 billion, depending on how you count it, to try and make farmers whole for the loss of exports to that Chinese market. We're now potentially talking on Liberation Day about putting tariffs on 15 countries, our biggest trading partners. Potentially all countries will get some level of tariffs. And so making farmers whole, if their goods both cost more to produce and now are disadvantaged in the marketplace because they cost more when they export them or will be less competitive, that would be a pretty big number. But the other thing that you have seen is targeting our neighbors in Mexico and Canada, getting to your question. We've been living under NAFTA and then renegotiated as the U.S.-Mexico-Canada Agreement, or USMCA, for, 30 years, 1995 or something. And, most of the goods that go between our countries, the vast, vast majority move completely duty-free. And so if you are producing seasonal produce, for example, those companies have invested and they are growing in all 3 countries so that they can provide year-round, affordable, high-quality produce. And now suddenly, if tariffs are imposed on those products coming from Mexico, let's say, because right now it's still a little cold in Chicago, right, to be growing produce, they're probably bringing those products from Mexico. So they're paying tariffs on their own products. These are U.S. companies, like U.S. based, but they think of themselves as North American. The way they do their books is these are all their products that used to move seamlessly. And now, they would be paying tariffs to bring them in. So it really has, a huge impact on their planning, their operations. And add to that in the produce sector is labor. So we're looking at, an administration too that is very focused on migration. We have always had a shortage of ag labor, and that may be exacerbated here as well. So if they had to bring production all back to the United States, could they? And they would have to do so at a much higher price point. So it's, that all translates into less choice, higher cost for consumers on those very products that none of us eats enough of, right? So, it will translate these tariffs, whatever the product it is, right? Many of those tariffs, most of that will be passed on to consumers. And when that comes to food, those who feel it most are those, of course, who spend the highest percentage of their, wages on food.
As we sit here tonight, some 45 million Americans can't afford a diverse and nutritious diet on a regular basis. And as we listen to you explain the potential impact, Devry, can you speak a bit more about how all of this comes together on the grocery store shelves and the potential impact that both the steel tariffs that we've talked about, as well as the import tariffs, and how will they potentially impact those consumers?
Yeah, and thank you. And I Darci really hit on it. I grew up in the Salinas Valley of California. So if any of you are Steinbeck fans, I'm sure my Steinbeck collection rivals most. But so I'm going to give an example. Okay, so Darci talked about the fact that these are U.S. companies in many ways. In the state of where I grew up, we produce through December, like May to December, and then the whole operation moves down to Yuma, Arizona, and then over the border into Mexico. And so these are U.S.-based companies. I worked for a very large family company owned by 5 Japanese brothers, by the way, Tanamura and Antle, when I was young and all through college. And the operation was a U.S.-based operation, and the capital was flowing down, down to Mexico. And so what's going to happen is, these operations are going to have to decide, right? If the cost of doing business is going up, they don't have unlimited capital, so they'll have to figure out, where are we going to, invest, and the big challenge will become, essentially, it's not just farmer to grocery shelf, okay? You have producers, you have laborers. I'm going to go through this whole, there's probably 40 to 50 different jobs in between field to retail that are going to be impacted. You have the packers, you have the distributors, you have the truck drivers, you have the marketers. You have a whole system of jobs that is going to be impacted. And so when we start to see supply lessen, because by the way, we are a massive exporter, but we are also one of the largest importers of food. And we have to recognize that we can do both, and we have done both. And so what's going to happen is, Darci talks about it. The grocery bill is going to get more expensive as everything hits the border tomorrow. The grocery bill, your bananas, your coffee, your shrimp. We produce 20%. Here's a statistic of we can only meet 20% of demand here in the United States from U.S. shrimp out in the Gulf of Mexico. And so where shrimp has become just an everyday thing, and you have local restaurants that are depending, where families go out to dinner, basically 80% of our supply is now going to be, have a tariff put on it. And so it's going to impact all along the chain, Ertharin. When you go out to dinner, you're going to start looking at the menu and going, what just happened? Well, what just happened is your food bill went up by 25% on every single product, basically. And so, it's what I worry about most is what you've said. Look, the food shelves in Minneapolis where we live, we're getting record traffic to the food banks. Produce is a big deal. We've had such a success story with Canada. How many of you love those little peppers and your vine-ripened tomatoes and all of those things? These bring joy to our life. They're easy to introduce, horticultural products, fruits and vegetables to families who don't know how to necessarily prepare them. All of these things are actually going to be only for those who can afford it. Right? They become more luxury items overnight tomorrow. So we should talk a little bit about what we think is going to happen tomorrow, because maybe you and I have a little bit of a common view or a different view too. But certainly it's going to be a bit frightening to see it immediately take shape in terms of the price of food.
So before we get into what we expect to happen tomorrow, let's put one more building block on the table, and that is the question of retaliatory tariffs, because we hear a lot about our trading partners and their anticipation of what is to come and what actions we're expecting them to take, if any. Tell us, what are retaliatory tariffs and why are they particularly problematic in the food and agriculture space?
Sure. So, as I had mentioned before, agriculture, big export-dependent sector, big source of our farm and agricultural income. And so the bullseye is on those products, right? And it's always been the case that agriculture, farm groups have punched above their weight politically, which also makes them a big target. So our trading partners are very aware of how much their exports add to the bottom line of farmers, and they're very aware that farmers live in red states that voted for this president, and will try and use that lever. What's interesting about the last sort of trade war with China, and Devry mentioned this already, our big exports to them were key commodities, so soybeans, corn, cotton, and those were all hit pretty soundly with those retaliatory tariffs. And China is already retaliating on those products in addition to poultry and some others. Interestingly, most countries have to have certification of their slaughterhouses, their processing plants for meat in particular have to be certified for safety. The certification for our beef plants into China expired this year, and China just chose not to renew them. So we are at the moment locked out of that beef market, which is a very lucrative one for the United States and one that I spent many, many years of my career trying to reopen after they closed with the detection of mad cow disease, or BSE. And so, they just moved a little slowly on that at the time that they were being hit with these tariffs. So, but that's China. If we're now putting in place tariffs on Mexico and Canada, which Mexico, Canada, and China are our three largest export markets, then you have, that addition of places where we aren't sending our products, but we send different products to different countries. So if you have the EU in that mix, the EU is probably, it's importing higher value products. It's alcohol, it's processed products. And so not just your raw commodities, but more in the food space, right? Mexico is a lot of feed grains. We feed all their cattle. And, with our corn, if that were to change, that obviously backs up into the prices, and our farmers don't really have a place to go with that huge commodity. We've been so integrated with Mexico and Canada. I'm from central Nebraska. You just put your corn on the rail car and it goes straight to Monterey, where all the Mexican cattle are. Like, we've built infrastructure around this. And so the transaction cost, even if you can find a new market, goes up exponentially when you try to make product move. But, a multi-front trade war would really hit the gamut of U.S. ag exports in a way that we haven't seen before. And I will just say here too that China still needed a lot of soybeans, and so in that first trade war, it said, "I guess we'll go to Brazil," and so started pulling that, and we've never fully regained that market share, even when those tariffs went away. And so I think it's important to remember that the world doesn't go back to the way it was when the tariffs come off. New relationships have been formed, new competition has emerged, but there's also an environmental cost to this.
Hit on that.
I just it boggled the mind that in the last trade war, when the U.S. soybeans were hit with tariffs, suddenly U.S. soybeans were selling at a discount in the global marketplace. And Brazilian soybeans were selling at a premium. And so the arbitrage of marketing here meant we were sending our beans to Brazil so that Brazil could sell all of their domestic production to China at a higher price. Right. Think of just the waste of fuel
and add
time.
to that. But you hit on it too, and it's we have the most sustainable soybean production in the world, right? The industry has gone through a lot of rigor to put in soy sustainability programming, so they can sell to to those customers who are asking overseas. But when that happens and Brazil starts to take over, what do we start to see but more deforestation going up north, right? And so this has a massive consequence when Brazil starts taking on an even larger role for soy, for corn, for those row crops.
But Brazil has committed that they will not move more land under cultivation into the Amazon rainforest as a result of this. So that is yet to be seen. Put a pin in that. We need to have another conversation.
Yeah, we need another conversation.
In a couple months when we come back to that. But when we talk about retaliatory tariffs, when we talk about the potential impact on farmers. Now, Secretary Rollins was in Iowa yesterday, reassuring farmers and the entire agriculture community, in her own words, saying that the administration will provide emergency aid to farmers, as it did during Trump's first term, to offset losses from retaliatory tariffs on agricultural exports imposed by Americans' trading partners. So what's the problem if the commitment is there?
So I think we touched on it. There's just not, it's like a bucket, a small bucket when you actually have to support an ocean. So it's good on her that she's doing what she can in her capacity to figure out, because she's being handed a really poor set of cards. If you're the USDA secretary, you've got to find ways to support your constituents. So she's looking at that. One, it's not enough. And two, it doesn't necessarily make sense to take it doesn't make sense to take taxpayer dollars to pay farmers for what they could already be doing in the commercial market. And the farmers, when I say farmers are not homogenous, they're not. There are lots of farmers out there who don't want to be beholden to the U.S. government for their income. Many of them will take some of these supports because the farmer down the road is, and if they don't, it becomes a condition of competition. I've talked to farmers all around this country, some who say, what, I wish the dairy policy would just go away, let me, this whole notion of freedom to farm, let me farm. But because we have domestic policies in place, or their neighbors are getting subsidies, in order for them to be able to compete, they too have to take it. Number one, there's not going to be enough subsidies. And can I back up for a second and talk about terminology on
quickly?
Okay, we don't have to. I just thought it might be helpful to understand what's going to happen to the farmers. So there are different types of tariffs that are in place, and maybe Darci, you can help me a little bit here. But we've always classified tariffs when they come to the border as ad valorem, which are percentage tariffs, specific tariffs, which would be per unit of shipment, the combined tariffs, which we call combined, I guess, it could be an ad valorem and a specific attached. What's going to happen tomorrow is a stacking potentially, right? Mm-hmm. And so when we hear that farmers are going to face these retaliatory tariffs, we don't know exactly what they're going to face because the retaliation is taking place outside of what, let's just say technology gets hit coming in from Korea or autos get hit. It's autos for beef, right? Mm-hmm. And beef for autos. Mm-hmm. So whatever we see tomorrow in terms of what they're calling, what are they calling these tariffs? Like
reciprocal.
No, not just reciprocal, but then stacked.
Oh, stacked. That's what you're saying. They'll be the
right,
stacked.
But they just keep stacking, and it could get up to upward of 50%. We don't know the tariff that's going to hit. It could be a 50% tariff based on what our trading partners get tomorrow.
And just to be
Can you
clear,
imagine that?
Yeah,
this is very abnormal. I think we just have to be, all of these actions that we're talking about are contrary to the commitments we have made to our bilateral and regional partners through free trade agreements and to the rest of the world through the WTO, where we have pledged and that this would be our tariff schedule and these are the tariffs that we would never go above. This is all outside of that system. In some cases, using authorities that have never, and laws that have never been used to apply tariffs before, and it's unclear. So
even the subsidies are out. We committed to $20 billion max, right? $19 billion max of subsidizing farmers.
True. And then I guess that's the question is how do we report them, right? So also under the WTO, countries are supposed to commit to only subsidize their agriculture to a certain level because when you subsidize production, it can, it lowers production costs, you can overproduce, it changes world prices, the terms of competition. WTO is supposed to sort of govern all of that.
Yeah, I was just going to say, we could have an entire conversation just on the World Trade Organization and agriculture.
But I think it's just what might happen, right? We said there are tariffs on Mexico and Canada. They were delayed for 30 days. They were imposed. Then they were delayed again.
Right.
Tomorrow, will those tariffs come back in addition to a reciprocal tariff from Mexico and Canada, so 25% plus? Will the reciprocal tariff take the place of those 25%
That's what we're trying to figure
tariffs?
out.
Sure.
Nobody knows. And so that retaliation is coming off of a base that is yet to be determined. And so farmers who have always been sort of price takers in commodity markets anyway are now also saying, wait a second, what am I up against? And then, I think what's so confounding about this waiting for Liberation Day is that the Trump administration has talked about tariffs as in many different ways, right? Tariffs as a source of revenue to offset taxes. Well, in that case, what you would want is to set a reciprocal tariff that's 10%, 15%, but that never goes away, or else you don't have an ongoing source of revenue. They've also talked about tariffs as a source of leverage, that, countries are not treating the United States fairly. They have these practices we hate, so we'll hit them with a big tariff, and from that tariff, we'll make them negotiate away those, barriers to our exports, or those over-subsidization that makes their imports too cheap. Well, if that's your goal, you're going to put in a really high tariff so that you can put in the pressure, but it won't last very long because the goal is to negotiate it away. Any of those are now options, right? So hard to predict.
So we know it's hard to predict, but these are really smart people in the administration who are working on these issues. So let me put the devil's advocate here. Could this approach by this administration, their high stakes approach, because that's what it sounds like, they're gambling to drive to a result.
Yeah.
And so could these actions encourage countries to change their trading policies with the United States to the benefit of American agriculture and American consumers?
Yeah, I absolutely want to be positive here too, right? Because that's why I was going down the rabbit hole of terminology. So you have tariffs that I was talking about, and then you have what's called NTBs, non-tariff barriers. And these non-tariff barriers could be anything from standards, like really restrictive standards on our exports, to state-owned enterprises dominating the market in these countries. I mean, you think of a whole like toolbox of ways to keep products out, and every country does that. Every country puts in non-tariff barriers just like we do. And USTR, the U.S. Trade Representative, just issued, I think it was just this week, the non-tariff barrier report. And I recommend you all, if you really want to understand this, it's an interesting report. It goes country by country. What are all the countries putting on us that are keeping us out of the markets? And this is where I do want to say, if we're going to go through all of this, this is where we want to take a look and say, how do we solve some of these problems that are in this report, right? Everything from not being able to get, certification to export seeds into China, or I used to, when I was at USTR, the Europeans complex tariffs by how much wheat and how much sugar and how much butter and how much is in a product. They put a very complex tariff in place where we have 5,500 tariff lines. They have 55,000 tariff lines for processed products. So there is a whole host of non-tariff barriers that can be addressed here. And when you hear tomorrow that it's like a tariff, let's just say an economy like Europe is putting, 40% tariffs, what they may be talking about is a tariff equivalent. So you can go look and say, okay, look, there's a percentage ad valorem tariff, but then you stack on the non-tariff barrier that doesn't get our product through, like the standards on, not certifying the plants, the Chinese not certifying our beef plants. That's a non-tariff barrier. You very quickly can start calculating what's called a tariff equivalent. And this administration is not wrong. There are tariff equivalents that are very high. And so my hope is that we get some sort of resolution of this so that we can get back to, food and agriculture products flowing more freely across borders, right? Because that helps consumers and citizens worldwide and begins to lower the cost of food.
So there is a potential silver lining
There's a potential silver lining. I mean, that's, if they're going to break things, there's a lot to fix at the same time. But can I just say this? What's not being talked about is that we have some of the most protectionist systems in place as well, right? So when I left UC Davis, my professor said, Devry, whatever you do, don't get into sugar. Well, what's one of the first jobs? I was the sugar analyst for the U.S. government for 5 years at the International Trade Commission, which is one of the most protected imports actually in the world. We probably let in 1.25 million metric tons, and we consume, unfortunately, over 10 million, so we could cut back. We watch sugar coming into the United States closer than we probably watch fentanyl. Or at the time when I was in my role, we watch it closer than we watch cocaine coming across the border, right? So we have protective sugar programs. We also have, I did my graduate thesis on, it was very interesting, dairy quotas. Okay, we have quotas for Emmentaler cheese. We have quotas for Irish butter. We have very restrictive quotas coming into the United States. We have seasonal tariffs on our produce. I mean, Darci and her team, when they would go around and negotiate these agreements, Ertharin, you see the tariff and then you flip to the back of the tariff schedule. Really interesting, chapter 98 and 99. We have special safeguards based on season so that our, California and Florida orange growers don't have to compete, right, with the Spanish, remember the Spanish clementines coming. So we actually have a very protected border. We are not dummies. We have negotiated the best trade deals. We only have 15 of them. Some countries have many more, but we have negotiated the best trade deals in our favor than any other country. And why do countries want to have trade deals with us? Because we have consumers who want to buy their products, right? Yeah. So I just don't want people to think we're not a very protected economy. We are quite protected.
So we have skeletons in our closet too, right? Well, this talk of unfairness and how other countries are very unfair, and that's what we have to correct. That lack of fairness is often a negotiated result with those same countries that we accepted at one point, right? And so to declare these things unfair and to unilaterally take action using a methodology that no one knows yet, right? That is a shock to the system. But other countries could do the same. They could decide that our seasonal tariffs or our sugar program is worth a 5% tariff on all of their goods too, and use the same methodology. But I think, and I agree with Devry, and you're already seeing it. There are already countries going to visit USTR who are afraid about what's coming tomorrow, who are saying, you know, maybe we could buy some more commodities from you, or maybe we could unilaterally lower our tariff on some things we know are important to you to try and avoid big tariffs coming, right? So it's not that that leverage won't work. My concern is at what cost? And I think that, you know, not going through the normal negotiating process in those systems has created an incredible lack of trust in us as a reliable trading partner. And, you know, when I was the chief ag negotiator at USTR, that was the time when we were negotiating the Trans-Pacific Partnership trade deal. And there were, which we chose not to ratify. But at that time, I would talk to potential big customers in Malaysia and, you know, these countries that we were negotiating with. And they would say, you know, we only have like this 3% tariff on your soybeans or your corn. Grain tariffs tend to be low. If you could get that down, that would mean the world to me. Like if you could get Malaysia to drop the tariff or whatever, your grain sells at a premium for a reason. And I'm willing to pay a few percentage points more because in the United States, you send me product on spec and on time, and you honor contracts, and your laws are stable, and you're transparent, and the certainty that comes with doing business with the United States is of value to me. We trust the way that you do business. I'm not so sure that's going to be the case on the other side of this, where we're taking unilateral action that upsets agreements that we've already made. Are we the reliable partner? Is that premium, that trust that we commanded still going to be there? And I think that, you know, those questions are going to reverberate for a really long time. It takes a long time to build trust. It doesn't take very long to disrupt it.
So that, before we go to Q&A, which we will do very shortly, there's a microphone in the middle here that we will go to for those of you in the room who have questions. And I have a long list of questions from those who are online. But very quickly, each one of you, what good or bad effect can this have longer term on our relationships with our trade partners, both our regional as well as our global trading partners?
Good or bad, or good and bad?
Good or bad.
I'm going to focus on good just because I feel like we've been a bit of, you know, we've been kind of talking about.
Good is good.
I think the good part is that from a commercial standpoint, there's something called commercial diplomacy. And you're going to see American businesses really step up in a pretty big way to try to maintain those markets. So more delegations going overseas. The other thing is, you know, the governors in the states, one of their big roles is to get out and take trade missions. I think we'll see more trade missions, which is a great thing. If we can get more governors out internationally to talk about we're still here, you know, we still want a trust-based trade relationship, and we still want, you know, the states are looking for inbound investment and also outbound exports. I think we're going to see a lot more of that. And on the good side, I mean, how many of you, until all of this started to maybe some were in a pretty sophisticated crowd who actually wants to come on a Tuesday night to talk about tariffs, but most people aren't paying attention to trade. And so if there's any good that comes out of it, perhaps our country now will recognize how incredibly important trade is to our economic livelihood, our social livelihood, and we won't be able to talk about it today, but also to sustainability and our environmental livelihood. So those are my positive spins on it.
Yeah, I mean, I think, as I had just said, I think that erosion of trust and the erosion of the U.S. being in a place of leadership when it comes to building and maintaining those international systems, I'm afraid that is fraying and that it will take some time to get back. But I felt during the TPP negotiation and that 2016 year where both parties were starting to feel skittish about that agreement and the political support for trade was sort of waning. Trade has a vocabulary of its own. It's very technical. It's all of these, bureaucrats negotiating seasonal tariffs that most people aren't familiar with. I think we got caught up in the minutia of the systems, and maybe we didn't spend enough time connecting the dots for the general public about why that free-flowing movement of goods, and especially things like food that are, the basis of life, right? Why that had broader benefits. And, if nothing else, this should snap us out of the thinking that this is about bureaucrats and their, technical dealings and not about people's everyday livelihood. And so I think we're about to get some experience where if the trading system doesn't work, what does it mean for people's lives? Right. And then do we create a constituency for thinking about how we knit that back together? I think that's an important point that Devry made.
Yeah. You just led me into the first question. You just led me into the first question that we received from the audience, because we need to bring this home for what this means for people. And so the first question is, name 3 or 4, not 5, because we have a lot of questions, of commonly consumed foods, commodities, which might increase in price to such a degree that they will no longer be available to most American consumers.
Well, I mentioned shrimp. I mean, I think when I was growing up, we got that once a year as a treat. So the things that we're not producing here, shrimp, bananas, coffee. I think 60%, I have my stats, I didn't bring them on stage, but we import about 60% of our nuts that we eat, and different dried fruits. Broadly, fresh fruit and vegetables are already out of reach in many ways. They will become even further out of reach. And I would submit we're going to see consumption in lower socioeconomic classes just fall. So,
I don't know that they would, they'll become special occasion foods. I don't know that, they're completely unaffordable, but any out of season produce, right, is going to be a different economic equation with a 25% tariff on it, and things like coffee and chocolate and pineapple and, those tropical products.
When you sit with mothers who are on SNAP, and they are struggling to buy fruits and berries and berries and vegetables with the increased cost of commodities today. We're not talking about those of us sitting in this room. Those are the people, the Americans that we're talking about, who these foods will now be out of reach for them. First question.
Thanks for the opportunity to learn some minutiae about the trade negotiations. It's a very, very short talk, but I get a sense of it. It's great. My question is a general question, although I'm gonna use the Brazil soybean as an example. Try to get probably a sense of the general rule. So how feasible is it to have, apart from the arbitrage situation that you brought up, for the retaliation against U.S. soybeans and the market will shift to Brazil soybean, that kind of arbitrage. But how feasible is it for the Commerce Department, the U.S. government, to go out to the market, the Brazilian soybean market, since the market is switched to supply China, so the soybean will be a little bit on a shortage or the price is higher. So how feasible is it to go out to the market, the traditional Brazilian soybean market to say, hey, we can offer you lower price since the Brazil is supplying China, then we can supply our soybean with a lower price. How feasible is that kind of strategy? Also, the next short question is tariffs.
I'm sorry, we have a long line. I'm sorry, one question. I apologize.
That's
fine. You want to answer that?
I mean, you can answer that very well.
very quickly.
Having
Having worked for one of the largest commodity traders in the world, I mean, anything's possible, right? We just have to see. We really just have to see how the prices sort themselves out. But I think Darci gave an example in the last go round where that happened.
So very quickly in that same vein of Brazilian, what would prevent a Brazilian soybean exporter from buying discounted U.S. soybeans and redirecting that shipment in a non-U.S. flagged vessel to China as soon as it leaves the port of New Orleans?
Well, I mean,
I know. This is very sophisticated.
That's a very sophisticated. So, I mean, there is the origin of the beans, right? If they were to represent those as being Brazilian beans when they were U.S. beans, that they wouldn't have the right export certificate and that sort of thing. But there would be the temptation, right, to just take those beans to Brazil and then get the higher price by sending the Brazilian beans. But and maybe the vessel flag was not intended for this, but another proposal that has been made, the administration, and this started under the Biden administration actually, began an investigation into Chinese shipbuilding and their practices where they have come to really dominate the shipbuilding industry. So they did what's called a Special 301 investigation to see if there were unfair trade practices and subsidization of building ships. And the answer was yes, that there was heavily subsidized shipbuilding sector from China. But the proposed remedy that the U.S. government has put forward would be to charge $1 million per port call for any ship that either was Chinese flagged or was partially built in China, which is about 65% of the world's fleet. That kind of charge on a bulk vessel full of soybeans is just absolutely prohibitive. And so what that would mean, I think, for U.S. agriculture in particular is either that cost would make the product, it would be huge interference. So you'd have to either wait for a very small number of ships to service U.S. ports and U.S. products, which would then, of course, make our products drive up and they could charge more, right? Because now, and so time, money, all of that on the shipping side, that's a real sort of threat to U.S. commerce, not just in agriculture, but
it's to all. It's to
everything we export. Next question, please.
Would the higher tariffs hurt the middle class by, in essence, subjecting to the same food problems that the poor have, like produce being luxury, and they too will be forced to go to junk foods too?
Yeah, I mean, I would submit that there is a lot of change in purchasing behaviors that we're already starting to see. And yes, when we talk about middle class and even upper middle class, what we're also starting to see is buying of store brands versus brand brands, et cetera. So I think we're going to see a widespread, if these tariffs go into place, we will see a widespread shifting of purchasing behavior. And yes, the middle class, I mean, the grocery basket will be more expensive. More of, your paychecks as middle class or in other lower socioeconomic brackets is going to go toward food, which means less toward electronics and other things. And so, yeah, American consumers are going to have to start shifting their purchasing decisions.
And I think this will hit a slightly broader swath of folks in terms of really changing behavior, because this is coming on top of a period of inflation that really hit the price of food basket anyway. So
we've seen an election where food inflation was a factor for many Americans, not just those on SNAP benefits. We talk about many of the items that were listed becoming luxury items for the poor, but they will become, many mothers, many shoppers will find themselves much more selective in their grocery basket because of the limited dollars that they will have because of the increased cost of, particularly of produce. And what is even more challenging from a food security standpoint is the impact that has on the ability to consume a balanced diet beyond just the staples of commodities to the full basket or the full plate that is required to support a healthy lifestyle. That is what we should be concerned about as Americans, because we're already seeing such a significant impact of food consumption on diet-related disease in this country. And the potential for that to increase when that balanced diet becomes out of reach for more Americans is definitely something that should concern us all.
Yeah. Thank you for the question.
Thank you for the question. Next question. What tools are available to the ag commodity groups and other policy analysts to evaluate the potential impact of tariffs on producers and consumers in order to prepare for such impacts? What should those who are in this room, what are the signals that we should look for to understand that stacking of tariffs, the retaliatory tariffs? What are the kinds of tools that will help any American analyze what is happening, what is said, and how this will potentially impact their lives?
Well, we have a robust land grant university system. That's the first thing where we, I started out as an agricultural economist. We have lots of ag econ models that are being run at the university level. USDA themselves can also run and analyze this. I don't know if you have any thoughts on this, but the private sectors, they've been putting numbers even last week on the shipbuilding issue. They've been paying for private analysis to show the economic consequences of the shipbuilding issue. To say, look, if $1 million is on every single vessel here, here's what's going to end up happening. So I think a lot of economic analysis is available. The question becomes whether anyone who's in a public policy space is actually listening to that.
Yeah.
Right? Because we're living in a moment where it's whose facts, right?
But we don't want to go down that rabbit hole.
Yeah.
Let's do a couple questions. We'll run out of time, but
Darci wanted to.
I just want to put a little point on that, which is what can farmers do to prepare? I think that's what makes this so challenging for agriculture, is that right now as these decisions are being made, we don't really know what the tariffs are for. Are they for leverage? Are they for income? And so how do you prepare for a lasting set of tariffs? Do you prepare for a short-term set of tariffs? So even what you're analyzing, I think, there's still some questions about what's the regime we're going to be living under. But also, and this is a basic fact that I know you know, but we have to bear in mind, which is that farmers are planting right now. And so if they decided to plant soybeans, they can't shut down the line for a week like the makers of widgets can, right? There's a stickiness to the agriculture sector. Once your product's in the ground, you're stuck with trying to sell it at harvest, right? You can't change course very quickly. And so I think there's a certain vulnerability of the ag sector that, it's slower to adjust because it's dependent on those growing seasons. And so, farmers have been price takers for a long time. They will continue to be. And it's very unclear what the market conditions they're going to face are at harvest from right now when they're getting in the field to plant.
I know we're out of time, but I'd love to get a couple questions if the organizers will allow me to do that. And they just told me yes. So go ahead, please.
What are the biggest knock-on effects from this chainsaw cut approach to the federal civil service when combined with these issues? I'm thinking, for example, the fact that we have bee populations collapsing throughout the United States, which impacts almond production domestically. We have bird and swine flu, and we're cutting inspectors if we need to get better permitting from our trade partners who are going to use every mechanism at their disposal to try and slow down our exports, like needing to get safety certifications like with the Chinese beef, and we're cutting safety inspectors and, you know, just even the mechanisms of processing inbound trade at the border with the Custom and Border Patrol partnering.
You're asking the right question.
Right. So let's get one more question. I'm sorry, you, and I apologize to everyone else, but the panel will stay a little later and answer questions, but I need to be mindful of everyone's time.
Yeah, I had a question about the rationale behind these tariffs. So I don't know a lot about this subject, but to me it seems like the benefits, or the risks rather, far outweigh the benefits. And so I guess like from just listening to the conversation that was being had, it seems like, you know, there is this thought that other countries are being unfair to America, so that maybe the tariffs will help to remedy that. But what is the best outcome? Because it seems like almost everyone is going to suffer from this. So what exactly do these tariffs do that benefit Americans?
Okay, two really good questions. Thank you very much. So,
it is a really important question to ask. Do we have enough capability from a personnel standpoint to handle what's about ready to hit us? And when I think about just the massive changes that'll take place if we're putting a bunch of tariffs in, and you know, our ports are very busy. And you know, do we have the right operational infrastructure to handle all of the changes that are going to happen everywhere all at once? It is an open question, and I think it's really important that we understand that, because we could see some major, you know, stoppages at the ports, but also why it's always been really important for us worldwide to negotiate through a harmonized tariff system, which, by the way, I want to nerd out for 1 second. It's based on the Dewey Decimal System, for any of us who are old enough to know that tariff codes are really based on every item that comes in has an 8-digit or a 10-digit statistical annotation based on the Dewey Decimal System.
Cocktail party chatter.
Yeah, sorry. But the reason those are really important and why we wanted our trading partners to come to the table in the World Customs Organization with us and agree on all this is so that we could stamp out corruption. If all of us, you know, have the same set of understanding and expectations when products hit our border or our products hit theirs, then it's less ripe for corruption. I worry there's going to be some overwhelmed folks at the border, some workarounds. We got a question on rules of origin. Is this really a U.S. bean or a Brazilian bean? There's going to be all kinds of opportunities for folks to try to work around paying these tariffs and taxes. I don't know if we have enough personnel to handle it, frankly. So
I want to touch on the point that was made in the question about when we talk about our trading system, it's tariffs, tariffs, tariffs right now. Mm-hmm. But our international trading system is also international standards and cooperation and scientific underpinning to make sure that we are protecting food safety and animal and plant health. And I am very worried about the expertise in our federal civil service that is working both with trading partners overseas to help them better protect plant and animal health and food safety, but also then inspecting product that may come, you know, to the U.S. or is grown in the United States to make sure it does that. And in the face of a changing climate where we know pests and diseases are moving to new places and more quickly, like the challenges of keeping global agriculture productive and healthy are greater than ever. And so we need to be in a space where we're building trust and cooperation and bringing the best science to bear. And I do worry that we're weakening kind of that underpinning of the trade system. At the same time, we're also putting barriers in place to the movement of product.
Yeah. Do you want me to answer quickly the other question on why it seems like it's hurting more people than helping? I believe that this administration has realized that they can use tariffs as a way to get other things out of trading partners, even if it's not related to trade. And so when folks are saying, gee, this is a bad deal. Look, the American public was not behind trade and has not been behind trade. And you know, the Trans-Pacific Partnership, you were a negotiator, I led the Business Coalition. No one was behind the integration of 12 nations coming together and negotiating standards, you know, and all of these cooperation. So now folks are waking up and saying, well, wait, isn't this a bad deal? It's a very bad deal. It's a very bad deal. What's behind it is leverage. And so what can be done? I want to end on some solutions. Number one, talk to the fact that you're here and coming up to speed is number one. You know, just get not just educated. That's not the right word. It's more engaged. Learn about it, read about it, talk about it. Make sure you're raising this with your key members of Congress and others, policymakers that can do something. But if you're in business and you're concerned about it, do a full-scale tariff evaluation. We are doing that, Ertharin, for our clients. We've got clients who have just put their heart and soul into innovating products, sustainable products, and their tariff list is this long, going between Canada and the U.S., bringing in jackfruit from India to come up with a really, you know, great plant-based product, but, you know, are getting hit. So figure out your tariff exposure, and then even more broadly, take a look and diversify your supply chain. There are some folks where we say, look, you can't just count on one. It's not wise anyway, even if you did have a NAFTA or a USMCA. Look at other sources. Go build cooperation in other places and spaces, because you're going to have to hedge your bets pretty significantly, because we've just had the rug pulled out of the entire international trading system.
So Darci, you get the last word.
Well, I think it's great advice, right? And so I think companies are doing that, right? Because even the threat of tariffs means that companies have to prepare, right? They have to be prepared in case of what's next. And so there's a lot of scenario planning and contingencies and diversifying supply chains going on so that people aren't completely left in the lurch if their, you know, products or suppliers are hit. But I think part of the reason tariffs are so tempting is they're fast and they hurt. But they're very blunt instruments, because they hurt not only the countries they're applied against. If they're going to hurt them, it's because U.S. Customers needed those products and are also the ones paying the tariff, right? And so in international trade, you often find trade disputes are resolved before you get to the point that countries are allowed to apply tariffs, because tariffs hurt both sides, right? And we're talking about that pain right here. But we also have a president and some of his advisors who have been very clear that they see trade deficits as a sign of weakness and a sign that the U.S. is sort of controlled by other countries who then own our assets in this unequal relationship. And I think that underlying philosophy of not wanting to be in that deficit situation is part of what makes tariffs such a tempting tool. But I would say, as consumers, as businesses who have to deal with this, it doesn't have to be an ideological fight, right? That if what you want to do is make the point of whether these tariffs are painful, be factual. Some of the best statements I've seen so far from ag and other groups have just said, since the Mexico and Canada tariffs were threatened, this is what we've seen. We've seen cancellation of multiple orders, particularly like in produce going to Canada, because our customers don't know from the time they sign the contract until it actually lands in Canada what they will be paying, and that uncertainty has led to cancellation. But also because Canadian consumers aren't very excited about U.S. products, and they're worried about putting them on shelves because of the anger this has engendered. That's a factual statement that says this is hitting my bottom line. It doesn't say tariffs are good or bad. It doesn't say you're a good politician or a bad one. I think simply spelling out from a business perspective, this is what I'm dealing with, this is the ripple effect of this policy, can be quite effective and, you know, very effective at helping people understand, you know, what actions at the border end up for people on Main Street. And so we just need more of that transparency and sharing and, you know, using that for influence. And you don't have to get into the political and the ideological piece.
Don't make trade political.
Yeah. And the don't make trade political. That's a great line. And the challenge of the uncertainty for business and the impact that has on the business ability to make decisions, let alone the farmer's ability to know what to plant. Yeah. And the part of the story that has not yet been completely formed, let alone told, is the effect on consumers. And so there may be an opportunity for us to have another conversation in 6 months to say, what did this really mean? Or not. Yeah. With that, I thank you for today's conversation.